My name is Julie Cavalton, and I am a nurse in a government hospital. What I am going to share with you is the testimony of my near-death experience, which happened when Jesus showed me the shocking truth about fasting. I was totally shocked when I heard it. I really saw and experienced something that completely changed my understanding about fasting, prayer, and the spiritual realm. But before we start, please type in the comment whether you believe in these divine encounters or not. Let's have an unbiased and knowledge-filled discussion so that the viewers of this channel can learn something. And you can also be a part of this divine journey by subscribing to this channel. It was a normal day at the hospital, and I was doing my job as usual, but on that day, everything changed in an instant. There was a crash, a moment when everything around me went completely silent. I felt an overwhelming sense of darkness, like the world had disappeared, and all I could feel was a deep peace. My body felt very heavy, but I couldn't understand why. And then I realized something strange. I couldn't feel anything anymore. My heart had stopped, and I couldn't breathe anymore. It was as if time had stopped, and I had stepped into a completely different world. Suddenly, in the midst of that silence, I saw a light so bright that it filled every corner of my being with warmth and peace. The next thing I knew, I was no longer in that dark place. I was standing before Jesus. I can't quite put it into words, but his presence was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't just about what I saw or felt. It was a feeling of being deeply known and completely loved, in a way that was beyond any human understanding. There was no judgment, only pure love. His eyes met mine, and without saying a word, I knew he was waiting for me to understand something. When I found myself standing in that place, I couldn't quite grasp where I was. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. It wasn't a typical setting. There were no walls, no ground beneath my feet, just an endless space filled with this radiant, peaceful light. It wasn't blinding, but it was so pure, so perfect, that I felt like it was soaking into every part of me. The stillness around me was unlike anything I had ever known. There was no noise, no hurry, just a profound sense of calm. And then I saw him, Jesus. His presence was like a warm embrace, one that didn't just come from him, but filled the entire space. I didn't even have to look around for him. It was like I just knew he was there. The moment he appeared, I felt completely surrounded by peace. I could sense it in the air, in the light. It was like I was standing in the very essence of love itself. I had no words to say. I just stood there, overwhelmed by the love and warmth that radiated from him. It was like he wasn't just looking at me, but seeing into the very depths of my heart. There was no fear in his eyes, no judgment, only understanding, compassion, and love that surpassed anything I could ever have imagined. It was as if he knew everything about me, every struggle, every doubt, every moment of fear, and yet he accepted me completely, just as I was. Then he spoke. His voice was soft, yet powerful, filled with such kindness that I could feel it deep within me. "Julie," he said, and I knew he was speaking directly to me, "I have called you to understand the truth about fasting." His words were simple, but there was so much weight to them. I felt like I had been waiting for this moment my entire life, like these words were meant just for me. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. His voice was like a gentle breeze, one that calms you after a storm. His words didn't just pass through me. They sank deep into my soul, bringing a sense of understanding I had never experienced before. There was no rush, no urgency, just a deep knowing that I was exactly where I was meant to be. In that moment, it became clear to me I was being shown something far beyond the ordinary, something that would change everything I had ever believed about fasting, prayer, and my relationship with God. As I stood there before Jesus, His words began to sink deep into my heart. I felt like I was receiving a truth that I had always longed for, but never fully understood. He began to speak about fasting, and the more He spoke, the more I realized just how little I had grasped the true purpose of it. Jesus didn't start with the typical reasons people fast, about dieting or cleansing the body. No, He went straight to the heart of the matter, revealing something much deeper. Fasting is not just about abstaining from food, He said gently, His voice as calm as ever. It is a spiritual weapon. His words hit me hard like a bolt of realization. I had always seen fasting as a sacrifice, something you did when you wanted to deny your body, but I never considered it as something more, something powerful, something that could truly change your life. Jesus continued, "Fasting is a weapon to break the chains of the flesh." I could feel His words like a wave of understanding washing over me. The chains He was referring to weren't just physical, but spiritual. Our flesh, with all its desires and distractions, often pulls us away from God. It can trap us in patterns of sin, pride, and self-indulgence. But fasting, He explained, acts as a tool to break free from that. It's not about simply going without food. It's about denying the flesh its constant control, its endless demands, so that our spirit can be set free. As He spoke, it became clear to me that fasting isn't about punishing ourselves or trying to prove our worth. It's a way to humble ourselves, to tell our bodies and minds that we are in control, not the cravings, not the distractions. Jesus explained that by fasting, we open ourselves to God in a way we often can't when we're constantly feeding our desires. The body becomes weaker, yes, but the spirit becomes stronger, more attuned to God's voice. Through fasting, our spirits are given the opportunity to draw closer to God, to listen more carefully, to hear His will for our lives. It is through fasting that you release your spirit to be more in tune with my will, He said, His eyes meeting mine with a knowing look. I felt like I was being entrusted with a secret, a key to a deeper relationship with God. All the distractions and noise of daily life could cloud our connection with Him, but fasting removes those distractions. It clears the way for us to truly hear His voice, to align ourselves with His purpose. I was astounded. Fasting wasn't just a way to lose weight or discipline the body. It was a powerful spiritual tool, something that could truly break the chains that kept me from fully surrendering to God. It was a means of drawing near to Him in a way that went beyond words or thoughts. It was an invitation to open my heart fully to God, to become more in tune with His desires for my life. I stood there, soaking in what He was telling me. Fasting wasn't a burdensome task or an optional practice. It was a gift, a way to set aside the noise of the world and make space for God to work deeply in my life. Jesus had revealed to me something so profound, something I knew would change my entire perspective on fasting and ultimately my relationship with Him. As Jesus spoke, His words became even more profound, and I could feel the weight of what He was saying. When you fast, He told me, you will find your faith tested and strengthened. Those words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. I had always thought of fasting as a way to be disciplined, to get closer to God. But Jesus was showing me a much deeper purpose. It wasn't just about the act itself. It was about the process of transformation that happens during the fast. I began to understand that fasting would not always be easy. It would challenge me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Fasting, as Jesus explained, would test my faith. And at first, I didn't quite understand how. But then it became clear. When we fast, we're essentially saying no to the physical world. the comforts, the food, the pleasures that we've grown so accustomed to. We're stepping out of our comfort zone and relying on something much greater. It's in that space, when we give up those things, that we find our faith stretched and tested. We're forced to lean not on our own strength or willpower, but on God. We begin to realize just how dependent we truly are on Him. At first, I thought fasting was about my ability to endure hunger or discomfort. But what I came to realize was that it wasn't about what I could do. It was about recognizing how much I needed God. Fasting strips away all the distractions, all the things we turn to for comfort, and in that emptiness, we begin to see how much we rely on God, not just for food, but for everything. Through the sacrifice of food and comforts, I would come to rely on Him more deeply. My faith would grow, not because I could endure the fast, but because I would have no choice but to trust Him in ways I hadn't before. Jesus then said something that truly amazed me. You will experience deeper revelation. He spoke so confidently, yet with such warmth, that I knew He was telling me something that would change my spiritual life forever. As I let go of the things that kept me tied to the world, I would open myself up to hearing from God in a way I hadn't imagined. The fast would create space for deeper understanding, for insights and revelations that would come from Him. I wouldn't just be going without food. I would be receiving something far more valuable: spiritual insight, clarity, and a deeper connection to God's will for my life. Jesus also promised, "My power will manifest in ways you have not imagined." That statement took my breath away. I had always known that God's power was immense, but I had never considered that through fasting, I could tap into that power in a more profound way. As I grew closer to God, as I leaned on Him more during my fast, His power would show up in my life in ways I couldn't even fathom. I began to realize that fasting wasn't just about making myself holy or showing God how strong I could be. It was about creating space for His power to work in me and through me. It was as if the act of fasting opened a door to a deeper, more powerful relationship with God. It wasn't just about me making a sacrifice. It was about God showing up, strengthening my faith, and revealing His power in ways I could never have imagined. I stood there in awe of what He was telling me, knowing that this practice, something I had never truly understood, was going to be a catalyst for my growth, for my trust in Him, and for a deeper experience of His presence in my life. As Jesus continued speaking to me, I could feel the depth of His words reaching into the core of my being. Fasting is also a way to break the strongholds of sin in your life, He said, and those words resonated deep within me. I had always known about the power of sin, how it can entangle us and bind us in ways that make it hard to move forward. But what Jesus was revealing to me went far beyond what I had understood before. Sin isn't just a mistake or a wrong action. It's like a chain that holds you captive, restricting you from living fully in the freedom God has for you. We can become so accustomed to it that we don't even realize how much it controls us. Jesus spoke of forces of darkness, invisible but powerful, that work to keep us in bondage. These forces can manifest in different ways, through habits, addictions, fears, doubts, or even negative thoughts that keep us from embracing the fullness of God's love and purpose for our lives. We try to break free on our own, but often we find ourselves stuck, unable to escape the grip these forces have on us. But then Jesus showed me the key. He said, fasting acts as a key to unlock the chains. It was like a light bulb went off in my mind. I had always thought fasting was just about giving up food or self-discipline, but now I understood that it was much more than that. Fasting was a spiritual weapon, a way to confront those strongholds of sin, those invisible chains that kept me bound. When we fast, we don't just go without food. we engage in a spiritual battle. We choose to deny our flesh, to give up something that has power over us, so that we can break free from the chains that hold us in place. As Jesus spoke, I began to see fasting not as a mere act of self-discipline, but as a powerful tool that, when combined with prayer, could bring true freedom. "It is through prayer and fasting that true freedom is found," he said, his voice filled with authority and love. Prayer and fasting together create a potent combination that helps us break the strongholds in our lives. Through fasting, we make space for God's power to work in us, to set us free from the things that keep us trapped. It's a way to break free from fear, anger, addiction, or anything that holds us back from living fully in God's will. Jesus wasn't just telling me about freedom in the abstract. He was showing me that freedom is a process, one that requires intentional steps, like fasting and prayer. These practices bring us into alignment with God's will, and through them, He breaks the chains that bind us. I realized that fasting wasn't just about denying my body or about being strong enough to endure. It was about surrendering my struggles to God, giving Him the space to heal, deliver, and transform my life. As I stood there listening to Jesus, His words began to make everything feel so much clearer. "When you fast," He said, "your mind clears and your spirit is sharpened." The way He spoke made it sound so simple, yet so profound. It was like He was unlocking a secret that I had been missing all along. The more He explained, the more I began to realize just how much fasting could impact my spiritual life. I had often felt like I couldn't hear God as clearly as I wanted to. There were moments when I'd pray and feel as though my thoughts were scattered, my heart distracted, and my mind clouded by the busyness of life. I couldn't seem to focus. It was as if there was always a noise, a constant hum from the world that kept me from fully hearing God's voice. But Jesus showed me that fasting was the key to clearing away that noise. He explained that when we fast, we're not just doing something physical. We're actually making space for our spirits to tune in more closely to God. I understood then that fasting wasn't just about abstaining from food or denying my body. It was about sharpening my spirit, helping me focus on what really matters, and allowing God's voice to break through the distractions. "The distractions of the world fade away," He said, and I could feel how true that was. Fasting helped me step away from the things that often clouded my mind: work, social media, relationships, and turn my focus back to God. When I fast, my heart becomes more open and my mind more receptive to what He wants to say. It wasn't just about hearing God more clearly. It was about understanding Him more deeply. As I fasted, I found that His guidance became sharper, clearer, and more immediate. His words didn't feel distant or muffled anymore. They felt close, real, and relevant to what I was facing in my life. This is why fasting is essential for those who seek my guidance in these troubled times. Jesus continued. It was like He was saying that in these chaotic, confusing moments in life, we need to be able to hear Him more than ever before. The world has a way of distracting us, pulling us in a million different directions. But fasting helps us regain our focus, renew our strength, and hear God's voice above all the noise. I couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency in His words. The world was troubled, and now more than ever, it was vital to be spiritually sharp, to know exactly where God was leading us. Fasting wasn't just about personal growth. It was a vital tool for navigating these challenging times. Through fasting, we make ourselves available to God's guidance, ready to hear His instructions, and align ourselves with His will. As I stood there, taking in what He was saying, I knew my understanding of fasting had completely changed. It was no longer just about sacrifice. It was about clarity, focus, and hearing the voice of God more clearly than ever before. As Jesus continued to speak, His words sank deeper into my heart. "It is through fasting that I deliver my people from great trials," he said, his eyes filled with a deep, compassionate understanding. The weight of those words was profound. I had always known that God could deliver us from our struggles, but I hadn't fully grasped the role that fasting played in this process. In the moments of my life when I faced overwhelming challenges, whether in my health, my relationships, or my own inner battles, I had often prayed for God to intervene. Yet, sometimes I felt as though nothing changed, as though the weight of my problems was too great for me to carry. But here, standing before Jesus, I began to understand that there are situations in life that will only change through a deeper kind of prayer, through the spiritual discipline of fasting. Jesus told me that fasting is an essential part of deliverance. It's not just about asking for help, it's about engaging with God in a way that opens the door for Him to work in ways we cannot fully understand. The act of fasting combined with prayer creates a space for God to act in a powerful way. It's like we're saying to God, "I trust you enough to step away from the comforts of this world and rely on you completely." Through fasting, we acknowledge our dependence on God, and it's in that moment of surrender that He begins to move in our lives. The compassion in Jesus' eyes as He spoke those words made it clear that deliverance wasn't just about fixing our problems. It was about freeing us from the trials that hold us in bondage. I began to realize that my own struggles were not just obstacles to overcome, but areas where God's deliverance could truly shine through. Through fasting, we're not just asking for relief. We're opening ourselves up to the possibility of transformation, of being completely freed from the things that bind us. Jesus emphasized the importance of persistence, saying, "You must be persistent in seeking deliverance." There's a quiet strength in that. It's not just a one-time prayer, but a continual pursuit of God's intervention in our lives. Deliverance doesn't always happen instantly. It requires faith, patience, and a willingness to keep seeking God through fasting and prayer. Jesus knew that the journey of deliverance was not easy, but it was worth it. It's through that persistence that we see the chains break, that we see the breakthroughs we've been longing for. In that moment, I realized that fasting wasn't just about sacrifice or discipline, it was about freedom. It was a powerful tool that could bring deliverance from the trials and struggles I faced, and it was through this spiritual practice that God's mighty hand could move in ways I hadn't imagined. The trials we face may seem insurmountable, but through prayer and fasting, we can experience God's deliverance in the most profound and life-changing ways. As I stood there, listening to Jesus, I could feel the depth of what He was saying, and my heart began to open up in ways I hadn't expected. "Fasting humbles you," He said, and those words hit me like a wave of understanding. I had always thought of fasting as a way to draw closer to God, but now I was beginning to see that it was also about something deeper, about humility and submission. When Jesus spoke about fasting, He wasn't just talking about giving up food. He was talking about the deeper spiritual process that happens when we deny ourselves. Fasting, He explained, is a humbling act. It teaches you to submit to God's will in a way that nothing else can. In the act of fasting, you're not just withholding food, you're acknowledging that you can't live on your own strength. You're admitting that you are entirely dependent on God for everything, even for something as basic as food. It's in that submission, that surrender to God, that fasting begins to work its deepest transformation. I had never thought about fasting like this before. I had always seen it as a way to grow closer to God. But now I understood that fasting isn't just about drawing near to Him. It's about recognizing my own weaknesses and limitations. By denying my body, I was elevating my spirit, focusing not on the physical world, but on the spiritual. As I fasted, I became more aware of just how much I relied on God for everything, how much I needed Him, not just for the big things, but for the smallest of daily needs. When you deny the body, your soul is elevated, Jesus continued, and that statement opened my eyes. It's as though fasting flips everything upside down. Instead of focusing on the things that feed our physical selves, food, comfort, pleasure, we shift our focus to the things that nourish our souls. Through fasting, we're allowing our souls to be lifted up as we humble ourselves before God. It's not about punishing the body or proving our strength. It's about submitting to God's will and acknowledging that He is the one who sustains us. Jesus spoke with such clarity, showing me that fasting is not just an act of discipline or self-control, but an act of obedience. It's in the surrender, in the obedience to God's will, that we draw closer to His heart. As we humble ourselves, we make room for Him to fill us with more of His presence, His love, and His guidance. The deeper we go in surrender, the closer we get to understanding His heart, and the more we align ourselves with His perfect will for our lives. I had never thought of fasting as a humbling act, but now I saw that it was one of the most powerful ways to draw near to God. It wasn't just about what we gave up. It was about what we gained: intimacy with God, a deeper sense of dependence on Him, and a clearer understanding of His will. Through fasting, we humble ourselves, and in that humility, we find ourselves drawn ever closer to the heart of God. As Jesus spoke those words to me, a deep sense of peace washed over me. "Know this, Julie," He said softly, His voice full of tenderness. "Every act of fasting done with a pure heart is recorded in heaven. The rewards for those who fast with faith are eternal. It is not just for this life, but for the life to come." These words stayed with me, and I could feel their weight as if they were a precious truth meant just for me. For so long, I had viewed fasting as a means to grow closer to God, to find clarity, and to break free from the chains that held me. But now, I saw fasting in an entirely new light. It wasn't just a temporary sacrifice for the moment. It was an eternal investment, a spiritual practice with rewards far beyond what I could comprehend. Every time I fasted with a sincere heart, it was being recorded in heaven. It was as if God was taking note of my sacrifice, my obedience, my faith, and storing it up for something much greater than this earthly life. I realized then that fasting wasn't just about the physical discipline of denying my body. It was about creating a legacy in the spiritual realm, one that would transcend time and last forever. The rewards were not just for here and now, not just for the things I hoped to receive in this life, but for the life to come. In that moment, I understood that my fasting wasn't just helping me spiritually in the present, but it was building something eternal, an eternal reward that would far outweigh any temporary discomfort or challenge. The thought of eternal rewards brought a sense of purpose to my fasting. It wasn't about checking a box or following a rule. It was about participating in something much bigger, something eternal. Every prayer, every moment of surrender, every act of obedience was being stored up in heaven, and one day I would see the fruit of that labor in ways I couldn't even imagine. God was not only using my fasting for His purposes in the here and now, but He was preparing something for me in eternity, something I would receive as a result of my faithfulness. As Jesus spoke, I could feel His love and understanding. Fasting wasn't just a physical practice. It was a way to partner with God in the spiritual realm, building up treasures in heaven that would last for eternity. And with that realization, my heart was filled with gratitude. The rewards of fasting weren't just about what I could gain in this life. They were about an eternal connection with God, a deeper relationship with Him that would last forever. In that moment, I knew that fasting wasn't just for me. It was for God's glory, and the rewards of that act would echo in eternity. When I woke up from my near-death experience, I was a completely different person. The encounter with Jesus had left a permanent mark on my soul. I had gone from a place of confusion and uncertainty to a place of deep clarity and purpose. I had been shown the true power of fasting, prayer, and the spiritual realm, and it was as if I had been given a new mission in life: to share these truths with others. I could no longer view fasting in the same way. It wasn't just a personal discipline or a way to grow closer to God. It was a powerful tool that could break strongholds, bring deliverance, and sharpen our spirits to hear God's voice more clearly. I understood that fasting wasn't about denying ourselves simply for the sake of sacrifice, but it was a way to humble ourselves before God, to acknowledge our dependence on Him, and to engage in a deeper relationship with Him. Through fasting, we align ourselves with His will and open ourselves up to the eternal rewards He has for us. My experience changed everything about how I viewed my spiritual journey. I realized that fasting and prayer weren't just optional tools. They were essential for anyone who wanted to draw closer to God and navigate the challenges of life. The truths Jesus revealed to me were not just for me to keep to myself. They were meant to be shared, to help others understand the transformative power of fasting and prayer. Now I encourage everyone I meet to embrace fasting as a powerful part of their spiritual journey. It's not about perfection or doing it in a certain way. It's about approaching it with a sincere heart, trusting that God will use it to bring about powerful change in your life. Fasting isn't just for the strong, it's for all of us, and its rewards are eternal.